All right, so today we're wrapping up, and it was interesting. I thought what I was going to do, by the way, you all can hear me, I assume. I thought what I was going to do today was primarily error handling. And I've been dreading this error handling because I really was uncertain about what was the best way to proceed. So then, as I was sitting here trying to think about how to teach you guys error handling, I realized that there was another big thing that I really needed to cover, and that was functions. And that I couldn't probably really teach you error handling without teaching you functions first. So I'm going to do that first, and then we're going to do some error handling and a wrap up. And hopefully we'll get through all of that before the end of the day. As always, 80-20 programming. Code snippets I gave you in the chat. If you want to follow along, there's two of them, one for functions, one for errors. If you want to follow along, which is probably going to be a little hard to do with the error handling today, but you might be able to do with functions. You could do that with the text editor and FTP access and so forth. So we're going to start with functions. I have mentioned functions many, many times because, in fact, we've been using them a lot, and you really just haven't known them as such. All of the Infusionsoft API calls are kind of like functions. They act like them, but there are other places where we've been using many of PHP's built-in functions, and I just haven't necessarily called them by that name. But the idea in programming is that you don't ever want to repeat yourself if possible. So you never want to write the same code over and over again, particularly within a single script, if you can help it. Now, part of 80-20 programming is to just concede the fact that, we're only writing a couple hundred lines of code. For us, performance really doesn't matter. We're talking nanoseconds. If we have to repeat the same line of code because that's, for us, the most expedient way to get it done, then that's okay. Give yourself permission to do that. But ideally, if it's avoidable, and if you can figure out how to do it without spending hours and hours, then you really don't want to use the same line of code over and over again. And so that's where functions come in, because a function is a block of statements that you can write once and then just call it or refer to it when you need it elsewhere in the program, or even in other programs. I mean, what many people do is they will have a file full of functions called like functions.php, and then anytime they need, and those are things that they use over and over and over again all the time, and so then anytime they sit down to write a script, they will do something like require once, and they'll call their functions file. And for those of you who are thinking, require once sounds kind of familiar, it is because if you look at, well, now that is interesting. Oh, sorry, wrong file. I just had a total heart attack right there. Try this. You see it all the time here, require or require once, where we call the ISDK, which is actually a different file in the same folder. We say require, and that says, hey, in order to execute all of this, we also need to be able to use this file. So require or require once. So a lot of times that's how people will handle, even WordPress has its own functions.php. So a function is code that you intend to use multiple times. Otherwise, it doesn't really make sense to put it in a function. When you put it on a page, it doesn't execute. The way when PHP gets to it, it just says, oh, okay, here's a function. But until it's actually called, which I'm going to show you, then PHP basically just ignores it. And then when you call it, it says, oh, you want to call that function? Okay, I better go find that again and then run that. Okay. So it does not get executed when the page loads. It executes when it's called. The function, though, has to be defined generally. The function needs to be before you call it. Let's put it that way. That's not completely true, but for our purposes, we might just assume it is. Okay. Now, PHP has thousands of built-in functions, like date. That date function is, one that we use all the time. And the reason we can just say date and then, give it some information and it does what we want is because somewhere deep in the bowels of PHP, they've already defined this function. And then so that every time that we need to do a date, we can just call it and we get the result we want. So PHP has thousands of functions and we've been using those. But the key for today is that you can also create your own functions. Okay. Those are called user-defined functions. And the syntax of a user-defined function is this. We just start out by saying function. And then we give it a name, whatever name we want, and then parentheses. We put 2 curly brackets. I just moved that. We give it 2 curly brackets, and in between the curly brackets is whatever code we want executed. And in its most basic form, that is a function. Okay? Now, we can get a little bit more sophisticated with this. Generally, so for example, let me just see if I have this. Hang on one second. Where's my functions? Yeah. Okay, let's do this. I do have it. Okay, so let's look at this right here. And we'll take this and we'll take this. Okay, so that right there is the very most basic of functions. So it's a function called write message. And as nothing in the parentheses, 2 curly brackets, and then it says echo hello world and a break. Okay, so this is where this right here, that's the function. And then this is how we call the function. We simply take the name and the parentheses and whatever else is going to be in those parentheses and end it with a semicolon, and that's how we call the function. Okay? So, by the way, I just showed you, just interestingly, I told you that PHP had tons of functions. Well, require is a function, actually, and require once. And so this has something in it. But anytime you see something like this, require with parentheses, and then something inside them potentially, and a semicolon, you know that that's a built-in PHP function. Okay, so our function here called write message, if I save this now, that function is going to write hello world. That is at the moment the purpose of this function. And if I call it again, it's going to write it again, and that's all it does right at the moment is write hello world. Okay, now let's go back to our document here. So back to arguments for a second. I said, a lot of times, most times, in fact, a function is going to have what are known as arguments. Another way to think of them are parameters. And this is how you pass information into a function. Okay. So an argument is just another piece of Tupperware, like a variable, an array, or an object. The arguments go after the function name, but in between the parentheses. You can have as many as you want, and they're separated by commas. So we will do some more functions so that you can see what that would look like. So here's our next simple function right here. Okay, so this, now again, okay, here's this part right here. This is our function. Okay, and we've said function, we've called it family name. By the way, function names are not, I believe they are in case insensitive, if I'm not mistaken. We can check it in just a second. I'm pretty sure that's true. So even though I have it in camel case here with the capital N, I think if I call it with a lowercase n, I don't think it cares, but we'll just confirm that. So we have the name, and then we have the parentheses, and now we have an argument. And we're calling our argument first name, and it's a variable, okay? Because what we're going to do is we're going to feed first name in to our little function, which is then going to echo out first name, which we passed in, and dog, and then a break. Okay, so you can see here, here's where we're calling our function, and we're saying family name, and now we're giving it what this is sort of doing actually is this is saying first name equals major, right? So by having this argument, which is first name, and then feeding in the value major, what we're saying is, okay, wherever you encounter this variable first name, put in major. Oh, okay, so this must be, when we call it the first time, major dog. And then when it calls it the next time, it's going to say, oh, when I encounter the variable first name, I'm going to assign it the value Lexi. Okay, echo Lexi dog. So when we call this, and I will make one of these lowercase, just to confirm, so print major dog, Lexi dog, Drita dog, Ona dog, Rose dog, and Nessa dog, right? Because each one of these is a call to the same function. Okay. Peter, I did, but I will put it again. You can't see it if you aren't here when I put it in there. So hang on one second. Okay. Link to the chat. Link to the handout, rather. Okay. Oh, wait. Where'd my questions go? Okay. Okay. So that is a custom defined function with one argument. All right. Now, let's do one with two arguments. So down here, this is our custom defined function right here. So what we've, oh, this is not part of it. Here, let's clean this up so you guys, it makes more sense. This is just a break so that, there. So what we're dealing with is this right here, function, and we're calling our function sum. We're giving it two variables now, separated by commas. Remember, we can have as many as we want, and those are up to us. We can call them anything we want, whatever makes sense to us. And then in between the curly brackets is the code we want executed. So here we're saying z equals x plus y. And now we have a new phrase, which is return. I keep saying this, you guys, that like on the API calls, that functions generally return something, right? So in this case, what we're returning, if the arguments are the way we get information in to the function, return is the way we get it out, okay? So we're passing in two values, x and y, we're adding them together, and then we're returning the value of z, okay? That's what this function is saying. So here, when I call this, each time that I call it, I pass in two numbers. And so here it'll say, okay, well, whenever you encounter the variable x, you want to replace that with 5, and when you get to y, you want to replace that with 10. Oh, okay, so z then must be 15, like that. So now if I save this and let it run, that's exactly what comes up. 5 plus 10 equals, that's actually the echo statement, 15 is what it returned. Now notice here, I have no echo in here. When I say return, whatever I put in return, now I could, by the way, I mean, I could run this function and say echo and it would echo. I could, if I said like this, if I said echo z, which is different, oops, then return z, echo, this echo is happening inside the function, but return is what is basically the result of the function once it finishes, that comes back out of the function. Okay, so here, oh, so I mean, I'm gonna have to put a break here, like this, like this. Okay, now print it. See, it's inside the function. It's printed, it's echoing z, but then it's passing out, it's returning z, and that's what is being printed right here. It's being called and returned. Okay, so this is in arguments are function name, arguments in curly brackets, code to be executed, return is what comes out. Okay, and in a nutshell, that's functions. Now, functions can be really simple, or they can be long and complex. It all just depends on what you need them to do. Now, the reason I realized I had to teach you functions is because I'm going to use a function. We're going to create a custom error handling function. And so we couldn't really do that unless I had covered functions. So now we've covered functions. Any questions on functions before I move on? Questions on functions? No? So hang on, I'm reading Peter's question. Sort of. So Peter is saying, so is this another way that we could search for a list of tags like we did the other day? Yes and no. A function can do anything that you want. However, so let's just say what you use a function for is something that you do over and over and over again. Okay? So what you might do is inside here, you might put something like, let me show you actually. So let's just go to, let's see if I have that file. Where did we do that? In strings, right? So let me grab that just so I have it. This. Okay. I mean, we're kind of putting a function inside of a function inside of a function, but it's okay. So what you might do is something like this. Okay. So you would say, by the way, this isn't going to run because we aren't connected to the API, but we might move it over and try it. So we might say function get tags. Okay. And so then we put parentheses and 2 curly brackets. Okay. Now, in order to, well, let's just go here. So the code that we want to run in order to get tags is we want to get a certain tag. Okay, or actually we want to get it for a certain, we want to pull the field called groups from a certain contact, right? So what we would do here is we would change this to contact ID, and then our argument here would be contact ID, so that to then use this function over and over again, all I would have to do is say get tags, and the value I would pass in would be the contact ID. So in this case, like 133. And so when I did that, what it would do is it would say, oh, get tags. Okay, here's get tags. Okay, so contact ID must be 133 because that's the argument that we passed in, or the parameter we passed into the argument. And so then we're going to go to we want the field groups. We're going to go load the contact for 133 and return groups. And then, which means that actually we'd have to what's missing here, right, is return. So what are we going to return? We are going to return condat. And I spelled that wrong because, yeah, $sign would be helpful, because whenever an API call is run, then it is a function in and of itself, kind of. So it returns something. What it returns is condat in this case, which is the array that contains the contact information that we asked for. So what we're going to return back out of that function is condat. Okay, so now what's interesting about this is that is, I believe, an array. So I wonder what that's going to look like when we run it. So let's just, for fun, let's do that. Let's go over here. Let's see here. What I'm going to do is this. I'm going to grab this, and I'm going to grab this down here like this. So yeah, okay. Let me just make sure about my little syntax here. This is not going to work. Just say not connected. Bear with me 1 second, guys. Okay. I hope this is going to work. Okay, now what I'm unclear about, so we'll find out together, is what's going to happen on this return, whether we have to do something like a printar, but I don't think we do. So let's just see what happens. Okay, so what we got here is we have require once. We've got the the connection. We're saying if we're connected, then go, and 130. We're going to say here's our function, and then we're going to call our function, and with 133, and then we're just going to see what happens. So it's running down here. Fatal error. Call to load contact on a non-object. Now that's interesting. So why is that a non-object? Contact ID. Get tags, contact ID. Hang on, let's just make sure. App. Call to member function, load contact on a non. So it seems like it doesn't like this. Okay, hang on. Let's just check it. Let me get Firefox going here and get Infusionsoft going here. And let's see what we come up with. Peter, I did assign contact ID. I passed it in right here. However, it is possible that it needs that to be like an int or something. So we'll just see what happens. Although it is an int right here. So let me just confirm all this. Let's see. Okay, that. Okay, so we're in the sandbox, and in the sandbox, we want I believe that Nessa is 133. She is. Okay. So that is a real object. We know that. And Nessa has tags. We know that. So call to a member function on a non-object. Function. Okay, let's just play with this for a second. No, Richard, well, it will, but query is for multiple contacts, not a single contact. Richard is asking, why is it load con and not query? Load contact is when you want the fields for a specific contact, in this case 133, and a specific field, in this case groups, versus if I do query, then I'm saying show me everybody who has a tag of 154 or something, which is kind of a different deal. So it does not like my function here. Contact ID, which is what I passed in. That's the end. Okay, let me just try a couple things. I don't think this is the issue, but I'll just try it. Nope, still thinks it's a get tags 133. Okay, I may have to come back to you guys with the answer. I mean, this is like super close, but I'm not quite positive why it's not liking my 133. You know what? Actually, let me try something else right here. I have another idea. Hang on one second. One second. And if we can't get it, I may come back to it because I don't want to run out of time on error handling, but scripts are probably, it really doesn't get a lot more important than that. Hang on one second. Okay, let's see, do a find right here. Find. Load con. I know you guys can't see me. It's okay. Hang on one second. That's just fascinating. It shouldn't have to be public function. I don't think. Post data. Okay. I don't have the answer for you right this second. I'm so close though. Everything I'm looking at about writing a function with this says That's right. ID return com. See, this is interesting. So let me just show. Let me just do this. Now this is just gonna bug the heck out of me, you guys. So let me go here. Just do this other one. Same. Oh no, that's not gonna work because that's different than mine. But return com. So now we should be able to do the same thing here and say, get company details, and we should just be able to put in an ID. Oh, I don't have an ID though. All right, I'll figure this out and come back to you guys on this. It is the only other thing I could think of, and I'm sure that's not it, is that this would have to be, say, for some reason, public function, but it's not because it's right there in the, oops, in here. I know that's not right. Oh, really didn't like that. Okay, I don't know. I'll have to figure this out later for you guys. But I will get you an answer. I'll probably just put it in parser on line 57 now. Because I must have, oh yeah, because it didn't like that public at all, did it? I'll have to figure it out and put it in the learners. No, it's not a well, now that's interesting. Hang on, Richard. Because now I'm getting a different error message than I had previously. Syntax error, line 59, but that's just because I've been messing with stuff. Unexpected comma. Oh, yeah, because I left this in there. Now it's going to say whatever it said. Yeah, call to a non-object. So I don't know. That's not a syntax error. That's something different. Okay, so anyway, but it's a good question, even though I didn't exactly get it working. No, there is already one, Richard. It's right here. Richard's saying he doesn't think I have a closing curly bracket, but I do. It's right here for the if. If I didn't, it would say that I had a syntax error. You can see if I delete that and then add it back that little thing made a little popping thing. So you can see that's where it's for. So that's not it. But the interesting thing about this question, once I get it working, is, it is an excellent point, right? If you use this all the time, which is, like, I didn't even think about this really, but it's like the next evolution in programming thinking, Peter, is if you do this all the time, which we do, like get tags or, something, and you're going to write this over and over again, well, isn't it a lot easier to write this than to write all that, right? Which is kind of the point. So if you're going to do it over and over and over again, what you would do here is you would just say, like, require functions.php or require, my functions.php, and then these would have to be public functions, but then all you'd have to do is write this one line of tag, pass in the stuff, and you wouldn't have to keep rewriting this all the time. So it's actually an excellent point that you make, because it isn't necessarily about searching for a list of tags. It's just a way of not having to repeat and write code over and over and over and over again. Okay, so let's see. How would it deal with using a function name if same as built-in function? Simon, it would give you an error. Big time. If you try to make like a custom function called date or require or something, it's going to give you an error. It's not going to let you do that. Did I assign contact ID? Yeah, I passed it in here. So it gets assigned as a result of being passed right here. And how does it know what contact ID is if you haven't? Because I passed it in when I called the function. This is, see, so contact ID is here, the argument in the function. So then when I call the argument and I say 133, again, back up here, what we're basically saying, here's function name, right, is the argument to family name. And so when I pass in major, it's basically assigning major to F name, so that when it runs, it's just going to substitute the one for the other. Okay, so you're actually assigning it in the call itself is what's happening. Okay, good. Okay, Ramona is having, oh, bummer, is having connection issues. We're gonna miss you, Ramona. Okay. All right, so moving on to that. Now that's really bugging me. I really want to get that working, but I don't want to spend too much time on this. Okay, so let's go. So now that we've got functions, any other questions on functions, by the way, before I keep going? You know, I just, like, for fun, just do one silly little thing. I know that's right, or it wouldn't say 59. Golly, that's bugging me. All right. Anyway, I'll figure it out. Keep your eye on the API learners group. So let's do errors now. This is not the one I want. I want this one, errors 1. Actually, what we're going to do is we're going to go back to your handout here for just a second, but let's just do that. Handout. I have so many files open today. This was not my most organized day ever. Right here, handout. Okay. So error handling. Error handling is so funny. So I did quite a lot of reading about error handling. I asked a number of the programmers who worked for me about error handling, and I've determined that it's a little bit like politics and religion. I mean, it's funny. If you want to start a fight, then ask somebody about error handling. So generally what we mean when we say error handling is about what should happen if things don't go as expected, because they just did, right? So perfect example of error handling is when I ran that piece of code and it didn't work. What we did is we basically allowed it to kick us in the teeth. And what that means is that because we're just sitting here working on code, the fact that it gave us that really ugly error message, like this fatal error, doesn't matter. In fact, it's actually kind of helpful, quite frankly, because, it tells us what's wrong. We didn't spend a bunch of time formatting it and making it pretty because we're the only ones that are ever going to see it. But clearly, if this was on a live production site and a user, a website visitor, or your customer went to do something and this is the page they saw because something broke, that wouldn't look very good. It definitely does not look that professional. And moreover, if you've got a million, again, our little scripts, if they don't execute, not the end of the world. You got a million lines of code and it errors out on line 20, when really in theory it could have kept going, without not ideal, but without affecting the result, that would be bad too. So error handling is about being intentional about what you want to have happen when things don't go as expected. And so in my reading and my discussions with everybody, what I discovered is that in spite of what everybody is going to tell you, there is no quote right way to handle errors. Every single person that I talked to had an absolutely diametrically different opinion about how you handled errors. And I like seriously. So when someone says, "Oh, well, you're not doing it right," you just like need to give them one of those, yeah, whatever looks. Now, it may be true that you're not doing it right, but but my point is it's not wrong if you're not doing it. If you're doing it and it works, great. If you're not doing it their way, don't worry about it because everybody has a different way. That's the gist of what I got out of error handling. So the opinions about errors, well, so first of all, the errors that can happen, okay, range from fatal errors. That the one that you just saw, that was a fatal error, okay? Um, and you know that because, come on, I can't get my mouse. You know that because it says fatal error, okay? That no matter what, that's going to kill your program. It is not going to keep running when it hits a fatal error, okay? So that's kind of like the most severe a fatal error. It's going to kill your script and throw up, that ugly error message. But there are other errors that happen that are not fatal. There are all kinds of error types that are called notices. For example, if I go to PHP error handling, and just show you, like, we'll go to W3 schools because I know they have it. There's a list right here of the different, now there's more, by the way, but these are some of the basic ones, right? So here's just a warning. A non-fatal runtime error, execution of the script is not halted. It's telling you something. Here's a notice, slightly higher grade. It's a runtime notice. The script found something that might be an error, but it could also happen when running a script normally. Here's a user error. So this is when there's nothing wrong with your script, but like you were expecting them to put in a number and then instead they put in, a string, for example. The user did something unexpected which caused an error, caused your program to choke. And maybe you want it to die, maybe you don't. User warning, non-fatal user generated warning. So this is one that you can, and you're going to see this. Actually, we're going to do this in a minute where we actually make it throw an error for some reason, a user generated error. Here's a notice, okay, very similar. Here's a recoverable error, and then we have like fatal error. So there's all these different kinds of errors. Simon, I'll get that towards the end. So depending on what kind of error you're getting, number one, you may want to treat them differently, right? And a lot of them happen and you don't even know they're happening. You never even see them because they don't halt the program. You only see like the syntax and the fatal errors, okay? So the way that I would boil down error handling is this. When something unexpected or unwanted happens, you have to decide three things. The first question is, what should the user see? Should the user not see anything? Should the script just keep going and the user is oblivious? The user being the person sitting in front of the computer screen. They're oblivious to the fact that there ever was an error because it really doesn't affect the outcome, so like a warning or something, so it should just keep going. Or should they see something like nice and neat and professionally formatted that says there's been an error, please contact your system administrator, or whatever. Doesn't matter what it is, but again, it's about being intentional about what is that. So that's one question. If this happens, this unexpected unwanted thing, what should the user see? Question number one. Then number 2 question is, should your script stop right there, or should it skip right over the problem and then continue running? That's a choice that you can make and need to make. And then here's the third one, and probably, well, they're all important. How should you be notified of the error? And because one of the things that you see, and you actually see people railing against, is like lazy programmers who do something called swallowing an error, which is they create an error handler that just kind of goes around the error. It doesn't tell anybody there's been an error. It swallows it. And so this error continues forever, but never gets fixed, or nobody ever gets notified. So in theory, you want to fix an error. Now, I say in theory because what I discovered is that even this provokes heated debate. If you go read on Stack Overflow or any of the kind of nerdy websites, you'll see that there are, at one end of the spectrum, there are programmers who say that you should always strive for perfect code, and that even the smallest little notice needs to be caught and corrected, right? Regardless of whether it affects anything or not. And then you've got actually people on the exact opposite end who say you should never, ever catch errors. If something is going to be an error, it should fail. It should fail loudly and miserably. And if it fails, fix it. Most people are going to fall somewhere in the middle of that, which is like, oh yeah, there are a lot of errors we don't want our user to see, and there are a lot of errors that if we knew they were happening, we would need to know it, and or we need to fix them. So somewhere in the middle is kind of what I think you are striving for. Okay. Now, what we've been doing up until this point is we have been in the don't catch any errors school, mainly because, as I said, it just makes it hard to read, as you're going to see when you've got all that error handling code in there. So it's, for me, like, I don't know. It's hard because if I don't write it while I'm writing the code, I tell myself I'm going to go back and add it, but I never really do. On the other hand, it's hard for me to think through the logic of the code when I'm also having to think through the error handling, because it just adds like multiple more layers of complexity. So I will just tell you that I don't put nearly enough I know I don't error handling in my code, but I also know that if I'm hiring a programmer and I look at their code, even without being able to read their code, I can pretty much tell how good of a programmer, how conscientious they are by looking at their comments and their error handling. And if there's a bunch of both, chances are they're going to write pretty good code. And if there's really none of either one, then they cut corners. So I mean, it's kind of a dead giveaway. I cut corners because for that very reason, I don't write that great of code, so it's harder for me to write error handling. So that's just kind of like my little confession. So you should be aware of the consequences if you're not writing it, All right. So just like when we were doing dates on Saturday, and I told you with dates, there's the new way, which is the way that we were doing it, which is the object-oriented way, and there's the old way. So like all these new things came in with PHP 5. I think we're on like 5.4 or something now. But when they put in PHP 5, it sort of ended up being like CSS 3 or HTML 5. It's like all these new fancy fangled things came in. And so now the conundrum is, well, do you keep doing it the old way or do you do it the new way? And with dates, I really, as I told you, loved the new way. And so we did the new way. Today, I struggled over whether to teach you the old way or the new way. And I finally decided that we're going to do the old way. And the reason is that the new way doesn't work with everything. It's kind of confusing, but anyway, and again, someone might tell me I'm doing this wrong, but to me, if I'm going to give you, like, if you need to write error, okay, let me rephrase that. if I need to write error handling code in order to write programs that work, then I'm gonna do the thing that gives me the highest probability of actually writing it and writing it well. And right now, even though try, throw, catch may be the more newfangled way, I think right now if else is probably going to be the way that we get the most useful error handling code written. And then later, when you get good at it, if you want to learn the new way and when to use that, great. There are some people, by the way, who say never, ever, 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 ever use the new way. Go look it up. And there are other people who use it all over the place. So I don't know. I'm going with the new way. I mean, the old way. Sorry. So here's the old way. The old way is pretty easy because it's something we already know. It uses if statements. It says if, and then, in the curly brackets is some code that fails, could fail. And if it does fail, then the else says, oh, okay, then here's your error handling code. And again, we've actually been using this in one place without really, saying explicitly that we have, which is right here in this statement here, where we say if the we're connected, if this connection is good, then run this code, else not connected. That is on a really, most basic level, the only error handling. Wait a minute. Was that always in there? That plus sign? No, it wasn't. Couldn't have been. Couldn't have been that easy, right? Sorry, I just got to try this again. Oh no, it's still there. Drat. I thought, oh, all right. Anyway, but so here's your your if this connection doesn't error out, run this. Otherwise, do something. And in this case, all we're doing is just saying not connected. But that's an example of at a really basic level of the old way. Now, I'll just tell you what the new way is so that when you see it, you know what you're looking at, or when someone mentions it to you. The new way, the new syntax is try, throw, and catch. And so try, throw, and catch, this is the object-oriented way. So what it does is it says try, and then in the curly brackets is some code that could fail. And then if it fails, the programmer, do something called throw a new exception. And the exception is an object, just like date time. And then what you do is then you catch that exception, and then the error handling code goes here. So it's try, throw, and catch. And to me, since this doesn't work everywhere, it's just, we're not going to do that. Not today. Maybe someday we'll do like an advanced class on that or something. All right. So let's see. Where do I want to start doing code? Not yet. Okay. So let's just finish up this, and then we'll just go to the code. So back to this, the three things. We're going to use if and else. The three things that I said, right? What should the user see? So here are some choices. Should they see anything at all? Or is the error not relevant to them, and therefore it should just keep going? If the error is displayed, then you want the result to look professional, not like what is printed out when left to its own devices, right? I mean, at least if you professionally say, something like, it's almost like a, sorry, every time we sit down to do this, my dogs about this time decide to start, can you hear that? Start playing with one another in the background. It's almost like if for any of you who use custom 404 pages, when you get a 404 page not found, and you give them like this cute 404 page that also says, oh, but hey, oh, sorry, we couldn't find that page, but while you're here, be sure and download our free, ebook or whatever. It's a 404, but it makes it obvious that you knew they were getting a 404, and then that they can go on in the right direction. Same with making your error messages look professional. Also, generally, if you're going to display it, I think you should always tell the user what to do. Like, don't leave them hanging. Don't say, oh, error. Well, yeah, so now what? Do you want them to call you? Do you want them to write something down and like tell you what they were doing when the error was created? Do you tell them, don't worry, the webmaster has already been notified? Do you say, this is a temporary error, try back later? What, I mean, it's just like writing a call to action on a marketing piece. To me, when you're going to display an error, I think you should tell the user what you want them to do, so they're not just left thinking, oh crap, that sucks, like. So anyway, and then the last thing, and this is something, again, I guess it's a real thing. They say best practice that you should not display the actual error codes, because somehow it's potentially a security risk. If people can see it, I guess they can figure out where your site's broken. And I don't know. I don't exactly know the mechanics of that, but I know that best practice, I guess, is to not display error codes. Uh, okay, for security reasons. And yet, I'm going to show you that the examples I'm going to show you do display the error codes, but that's as much for us as anything else. Okay. So that's question number one. Now, the second question, this is pretty easy. It's, do you want the program to die or do you want it to continue running? So if it encounters an error, do you want the program to just stop? So if you do, you usually in an error situation, you use a command called die, similar to break or continue. You could, however, just use break or continue, which we did when we were doing loops. But generally, it'll be die, and you'll see that in a minute. And just pretty descriptive. And then the last one is, how do you want to be notified? So, because a lot of times you'll have no idea. Okay. So you can print a message on the screen, but which is great for the user, but not very helpful for you if you're not the user. For example, or most importantly for our purposes, what if this script is being run as the result of a HTTP post snippet? You're not sitting in front of a screen. Nobody is. So if it errors, there's no way of knowing. It's a form that's being submitted, or what have you. A lot of times there's nothing on the screen, so that's not an option. So then the next thing would be to write it to either a log file or a database, which is an option. It's a very good option. We've been doing that in a couple of different cases. And you probably should always do that. But again, the problem is, how do you know that there's something in that log file, right? So then the third option, which I'm going to show you today, these are not mutually exclusive, by the way, you may choose to do all of them and then some, is that when it's really an important error, you send yourself an email that says, hey, you've just had an error in your functions-finish.php on line 59. So that you're not going weeks and months with something not happening that you thought was going to happen, and then you've got egg on your face because the client says, well, what do you mean we haven't been writing those orders or charging those orders? Oh, well, gee, the script was erroring and I didn't know it. Okay, that's where you email yourself a notification. So for me, that's like the most useful part of this whole discussion. All right, with that in mind, we are going to go to the code. So I didn't, let's see, here we go. So we're going to start here, and let me get organized because I'm going to do this in phases here. So I got to get rid of a bunch of windows. Okay, find this one. And close this one. Errors. Okay. So we're going to start with this. Now, by the way, kind of my starting point, we are not going to have time to finish this, but my starting point is the script that we wrote for one of the ICCs who posted in the Facebook group that if you guys will remember that anytime someone put in like a new contact came in, whether by web form, order form, or whatever, that she wanted their username to be set to their email address. And so we actually wrote a little script to do that. If you will recall, I forget, it was like maybe the third day, I think. So I've just used that little script that we wrote, and I'm going to use that as the starting point for what we're going to do here. So now I'm also, as we go, I'm kind of cleaning that script up just a tiny bit by fixing things that now we've talked about since we wrote that script that we might want to clean up a little bit. And so here's one of those things. So originally we had like the old date format and stuff in here. So I've replaced it with the new format that we did on Saturday, right? Where we say that we use the object date create and then date format and like this. So that's the only change that I have made at that point. So now here's where it gets kind of hairy. Oh, and so let's just run this and confirm that everything runs. What time? We've got an hour. Okay. I want a preview window and I want to hit save and confirm that we're all good here. Okay, you are connected. Perfect. All right. Now, so let's take some of the code that we had previously. I'll show you what we had, and then how am I going to do this? I'll show you what we had, and then we'll fix it. So what we had before, if I can find it. Oh heck, Briscoe project. Hang on. We had. Well, maybe I won't show you that because I'm not sure I have it. We may just have to keep going. You would think I would have saved that, but I don't think I did. No, I sure don't have it. LMNOP. I don't. Okay. Well, so let me just show you where we're going with this. If I'm going to do it that way, I might as well just not copy and paste. Okay. Let me tell you what we had. Okay. If you will remember, when we first wrote this, we hadn't yet done this. We just said if server request. We didn't know how to say if it's a post, do this. Else if it's a get, do this. We didn't do that until we did strings. Okay. So I've fixed this up to now reflect what we learned when we did strings. So for those of you who weren't here, let me just go over it so that you understand what we're doing. So what we're saying now is the issue was, the issue in this script was that if someone uses a snippet, an HTTP post snippet in the campaign builder, it uses a request method called post. It sends a post, right? However, if you use a action set or an action in the contact dropdown, it uses a get. And the problem with that is that number one, you need to be able to define which variable you're using. And the other thing is that when it uses a post, the default is for contact ID is contact ID, but when it sends it as a get, it calls it ID. So if you don't actually do an if statement to figure out whether it's a get or a post, you can't get the and I don't mean this kind of get, but you can't correctly pull the value of contact ID, which we need to be able to do other things. So you've got to do a bunch of ifs and tests here. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're using the super global called server, and we're saying if server, if the request method, which is one of the items in this array called server, is equal to post, then do this part. Okay. If it's equal to get, then do this part. Okay? Now, so let's just say that when it gets passed in, okay, then we've got another problem because so what happens if, so here's where our error handling comes in, okay? So now what we're saying is we're adding some more ifs, okay? This is what makes it, used to, it just said this, right? This is what used to be in here. And what I've added is all these ifs around it. And this is not even that complicated. But now we're saying, okay, well, actually, here's a good way to explain it. What you do when you're trying to write error handling is you sit there and you say, okay, what could go wrong here? And whatever could go wrong, I need to test for that. And then if it's true, then I need to do something about that. Well, there's a lot of things that could go wrong. That's kind of the problem, right? So, well, okay. So we could not be connected. We've got that far. Okay. The server method, we're saying, all right, if it's post, what else could go wrong? Well, it's possible that even though the method is post, that there's no contact ID being passed, right? Or that contact ID is null. So we're saying, okay, so if it's a post, and if there is if in that query string there is something called contact ID, and it's not, which is what this little exclamation point means, and it's not null. So it's a post, contact ID is there, and it's not null, then set contact ID equal to this post variable. Else, okay, because if one of these two things is true, then we're going to just say post is not set. Now, we could, again, just saying echo is not all that helpful because then the user sees something, but it's not logging it and it's not notifying you. So you would really, in this case, not know. So for now, this is kind of like placeholder for your error handling code. Does that make sense to everybody? Because this, while it's something, you're catching the error, which is what this is called. You're looking for it, and then you're specifically doing something when you find it, which is known as catching. We aren't really doing anything. We're just echoing something. Does that make sense? We're gonna actually do some things here in a bit, but right now I just want to get the structure in. Does that make sense to everybody? Or are you are your eyes already rolling back in your head? And by the way, I don't blame you if your eyes are rolling back in your head. This is why I was kind of dreading teaching this part. It's oh my gosh, the rest of this stuff is fun. This is not fun. What do you guys think? Okay, some varying. I'll assume those of you who don't answer have either tuned out or you're just going, what? Okay. So let's keep going. So here's another else statement. And this one is just the same. We say, okay, if the server request method is get, what we're trying to do is this. We're trying to set contact ID equal to get the get variable called ID, because that's what it's called when it's done by an action set. Okay, so we're trying to do this or this. That's all we're trying to get out of this entire thing. Is we're trying to do either this or this. However, but in order to do, like, figure out which one of these to do and test for the problems that we might have, that's what all the rest of this stuff is about. And this is why I said it makes reading the code and learning the code a lot harder. Because tell me that this, everyone says, oh, no, it doesn't. Yes, it does. Tell me that this is not way harder to read than, than just these 3 lines. I mean, it is. Okay. So anyway, so then I have a final else that says, and this is kind of like what is known as sort of like a default case. It's like, because I can't think of everything. So, if it's not a post and it's not a get, what if it's a cookie or something else? I don't know. So I just wrote an echo. We have an alien request method, right? So, and then I have a question what to do to beef this up. We're going to keep going. But now the interesting thing is, okay, well, let's just stop here and let's run this and see what happens. Because I think there's kind of some interesting things, right? It just ran. It says get is not set. Okay. So, well, this is interesting to me from an error handling standpoint, because you'll notice, like, we didn't call this script from anywhere. Nothing's being passed into this script. We didn't run it from an HTTP post snippet or an action set. And yet, for whatever reason, it's a get. It's when we just run, well, I'll show you. Look. Comment this out for a second. We did this the other day. Let's just do this. Let's do a print R on our server variable. Okay, on that server super global. And let's just look at it. Yeah. No, I want to go further than that. Well, okay, let's do this first. So save. Oh, heck. Yeah, spell it right, Kim. Okay, so bigger, so you guys can see this. Bigger. Okay, so here's our server super variable, and if you go look at request method, which is down here somewhere, look, request method equals get. Well, even though we didn't send it a query string, we didn't call it from anywhere, it's get. So from a immediate error testing standpoint or error handling standpoint, is like, well, this is always going to be true whether something's been passed or not, right? Which is why we had to add this if, because just because this is true doesn't get you necessarily anywhere. That it's a get, but there's nothing in the get. There's nothing in the string. See this query string? Query string is empty. So therefore the get, the ID is not set. So we had to catch that. Otherwise, if we tried to load that into an API call, what would happen? Fatal error. Is that now kind of making more sense of like what we're trying to do? We're trying to like catch these things that would cause the fatal error before it causes them. Okay. So this is a start. We got a tiny little bit of error handling in here. We've got a few ifs and else's in here. So then the next question is, okay, so what else could we do to beef this up a little bit more, to make our error handling a little bit more robust? Now, I'm going to go somewhere here. Like there's a tons of, like this is just the first 3 lines of our script, and this is what we've added. Okay. So if we went through this whole script, we'd be adding tons of stuff. But we're not going to have time to do that today because it's already, like 5:50, and you can see how long this took. So I'm going to show you a couple things that I think are important and useful, and then the rest of it we can either figure out together, or you can kind of, I think you can sort of figure out by just reading up on error handling and starting to write code and seeing how it fails. And as the more it fails, the more you'll figure out where you need to put in things to catch the errors, quite honestly. So here are the things that I think would be quite useful to beef this up. First off, is I'm going to show you guys how to write a custom error handler. Okay? And this is why we need functions. So what we're going to do is we're going to go all the way up here, the very top, and we're going to write a function. Okay? So when we write a function, what do? We say function, and then we give it a name. So our name is going to be our error handler. Misspelled it, 1 second. And then after that, we've got our parentheses, and we have our curly brackets. Okay, so here's our function. Inside, well, first thing we have to do is we have to define what the arguments are, and then we have to say what do we want to do when this function is called. Okay, now what this is going to be is this is going to be an error handler. Now, PHP has a default error handler, and that is what is used unless you write your own. So if we say PHP error, here, perfect, error handling tutorial, and we go to, we'll just go to W3 schools, that will work. Okay, creating a custom error handler, but I don't want that. I just want error handler. Hang on, this isn't what I want. I want to go to PHP. I want to go to the manual. Okay. Oh dear. That looks very scary, doesn't it? Hang on. Error log, error reporting, error handling, set error handler, trigger user. I just want like the basic. Well, maybe we'll do these are all about custom error handling. All right. But we'll do it this way. So the error handler, make this bigger. Any error handling function, whether it's a custom one or the error handler, okay, that is built in that will work if you don't do anything, can take up to 5 arguments in the function. Okay, so the first one, this is the only one that's required, and this is error number. Okay, all PHP errors have an error number. So you got to have this one, okay? They also have an error message that goes along with them, right? You saw that in when I kept trying to run that thing and it would say like error number, whatever, 67, undefined object or whatever. That's the error message. File name, if you choose to use it, is what file the error occurred in. Like when you ran what, PHP file created the error, on what line number, and what are all the variables. Like this is like a var dump. What are all the variables in that file that errored out? So these are what you can have in your function. Okay, so I'm going to write ours, and I'm going to use all 5 of them, but I'm going to call them something that's slightly more descriptive than those. Okay, so I'm going to call this number. That's the error number. I'm going to call this message. That's the error message. I'm going to call this one's okay. I'm going to call it file. I'm going to call it line for line number, and I'm going to keep vars because that's okay. That's the variables. Okay. So these are the things that get passed into our error handler, okay, by PHP when an error is generated. And then the only question is, what do we want it to do when that error gets generated? Because the only reason to do this is because we want it to do something different than what it would do by default. So what I'm going to do to begin with is something very simple. I'm just going to say echo, and I'm going to create, we'll do something like, we'll make this in PHP. So we'll say, we'll put it in bold, and we'll say error, right? Close the bold like this. And then we'll say, we'll put it in a little bracket, and we'll say number, close bracket. And then we'll say message on line and break and semicolon. So at the moment, when we hit a error, all we're doing is in a nicely formatted way, just saying error, here's the error number, here's the message on line such and such. And then for now, we're just going to say die. And that's going to kill our script neatly. In fact, you know what? We'll actually do we'll just do another one, and we'll say echo ending script break. And then, so what we do is we're telling them we're going to end the script now, and then, check back later. Now, again, and ideally you give them a call to action, you tell them what to do. That's not very descriptive, but for now it's a start. So this is our error handler. Super basic, but we're going to keep adding to this here in a minute, okay? Then what you have to do is, so notice this is at the top of our script, okay? And then what we're going to do is we have to do one other thing. We have to tell PHP we want to use our own custom error handler. And the way we do that is with a function, a built-in function called set error handler. And what we put in there is the name of our error handler. Okay, that's the argument for that built-in function. So ours is called our error handler. And so what we've just said to PHP is, we've said, okay, using this PHP function set error handler, we've said, okay, we've written our own error handler here. And so now we're telling you that instead of your error handler, we want to use ours. Okay? So now we can make it do whatever we want it to do, which at the moment is not that much, but it's okay. All right. Now, let's do this. Let's trigger an error out before we actually even get into all of this Infusionsoft stuff. Okay? So what we're going to do is trigger an error by echoing a var that doesn't exist. So, for example, we say echo some var that doesn't exist. Perfect. That ought to do it. So let's see what happens now. So when I hit save, because this is way up at the top. Now, this is actually exactly what I put in my error handler. You can see, make this just a hair smaller so that, okay, this is what I said. Bold, error, not bold. Put in little brackets the error number, which is 8. Then print the message, undefined variable, some variable that doesn't exist on line 27. Break, ending script, check back later. Okay? So what you saw is that when it threw an error, it's going to handle it my way. Now, there's some caveats to that, which is for one thing, there are some errors that you can't catch, you can't handle. Like the ones that we had before, that like a syntax error, for example. If you have a syntax error, it doesn't matter what, well, let me rephrase that. You can, but it's really, you're not supposed to, and it's really advanced. Like they assume that you're not going to put code into production that has a syntax error, you know? Like, I mean, that'd be like, you're publishing a novel with the incorrect spelling and grammar. That's like table stakes. They're not gonna let you try to catch that because they assume that you're not gonna do that. So even though there's like some workarounds that you could, in theory, you're not supposed to be able to. So those are still gonna die ugly, but that's on purpose. But everything else, right? Like, this isn't a syntax problem. This is just you tried to call in a variable that didn't exist. All of these kind of lesser infractions, if you will, or user created infractions are gonna now die gracefully because now you have something to handle them. Okay. All right. Did I want to do anything else at this point? No, this is for now. Okay. So before I keep going, questions on this? Questions on any of this so far? You kind of, even if you couldn't sit down and necessarily write this right this second, are you kind of getting the idea of it? Okay. Well, it sucks. It kind of does, doesn't it? It's not easy why, like, number one, I saved it for last, and number two, I never do it. Okay. All right, good. But you guys are sounding a lot more confident than you did the last time I asked, so that's good. Okay. So let's keep going then. A few of you guys didn't answer, but that's okay. Okay, so we'll keep going. Now, so let's do some more things. Like, let's make this little error handler a little bit more useful. So what we're going to do now is let's add to our error handler. So we'll do like this. We'll say, we're going to leave this and this, but we're going to, let's see, die can go down here like this. So now what we're going to do is, in addition to, because all we're doing right now is we're printing something on the screen, right? And in fact, you know what, before I actually do this, let's just check something here for a second. So let's go, it didn't say what time let's do this. Let's move this up, or we'll just copy it up here, this date time, because then we can match this up to our error file. Okay, so let's do this, and let's run this again. So 1701:39, we got this error. Let's go open our error file. Yeah, that's what I thought. See, because we caught that error, and so some of the, like the default functionality, if we had left it as PHP's error handler, PHP, what it does is it writes an error to the error log, right? But now, as soon as we said, hey, we got it, we'll take over, we'll use our own error handler, we didn't write anything in here that told it to write anything to the error log. So at the moment, all that we have happening here is that it's just writing something on the screen and then dying. That's it. There's no record that an error ever happened, which is not very, very useful, right? So what we're going to do now is we're going to add into our error handler for it to write to the log. Oops. So we're going to say number. This is going to be kind of basic, but number message online line. Okay, and then semicolon. So we're assigning that to a variable called message, error number, error message on line something, and then we're going to use this command error log. Error log. Now, error log can do a couple different things. And I'll show it to you here in a minute. But for now, all we're going to do is the default of error log, which is just to write it to the error log. The one that gets created in the same directory as the file that errored. And then we're going to say die. So now let's run this thing. And then I want to show you another thing. So if I say save, okay, just ran 170401, right? Same error. So now if I go to the error log and I open it, you should see that at 170401, now our message that we defined is now in the error log, which is helpful. Error number 8, undefined variable, some var that doesn't exist on line 35. Now, obviously, we could have added more. In fact, I'll show you some more in a minute. But for now, we're getting some information that we can refer to back into the error log. So that's really good. Now, another thing that's kind of curious, actually, that I was interested in when I ran this. Do you guys remember before when I didn't have any error handling, when I didn't have my own error handler? So let's do this. Let's make it like this. Let's turn off this and let's turn off this. So we're going back to the PHP default error handler. And remember it said get is not set is what we got, which is something that we caught right here because we aren't passing it anything. But watch what happens, interestingly, if we go back to using our error handler now. Our error handler, now we run it, gives us a different method, a different error actually. It says use of undefined constant, request method assumed, request method on line 56, ending script, check back later. The only difference between those two is that now we're using our error handler instead of the default one. Now, why is that? Well, because we're basically, the way that we wrote this error handler is we're catching everything, including like notices. You know, the fact that it was undefined request method wasn't fatal, didn't kill it. And so when we weren't using our error handler, it was just letting that go until it got here and we were catching it this way. Now, because we have written it this way, we're not testing for different levels of error. It's catching every error, and as soon as it catches it, it says die. So where before it would have let it get to this far, now it's killing it up here at line 57 or 56, right? So it's just, we can fix that, and I'm not going to do it right now because of time, but what we can do to make, we start to make our error handler smart. So one of the things we would say, for example, is, we would put an if statement in here that just says let's just do it. If number is less than 2048, then no, let's do this. Is greater than 2048. That's the error number. I think I'm doing this right, but we'll find out. Then we want to die. Oh yeah, here we'll do it like this. Then die. Else if it's less than 2048, We don't want to die. We just want to write it to the error log and, oh, actually, we don't want to do this either. We want this to go here. Like this. Okay, got it. Die, else. Okay, so we'll try this and see what happens. So you guys see what I just did? These things have a number. I think this is right. Message file line vars. I think this is right. So anything greater than 2048 is going to be like fatal, like bad. Anything below is going to be not so bad. So what we're going to say is if it's greater than 2048, then kill it and tell us that you're killing it. Otherwise, if it's less than 2048, don't kill it. Just write it to the error log. Okay? And then keep going, at which point it should just catch it itself anyway. So let's run this and see what happens. Yeah. Okay, so get not set. So it ran, it didn't kill it, but it should have, if we look at the error message, error file, should have written it. Nope. Actually, really? What did I do wrong there? 1709, it should have caught it. Oh, where's my thing? So if number is greater than 2048, else. But it wasn't greater, it was less. So message, number, message, online. Oh, maybe that's right, 1709.15. Let's try it again. Actually, maybe it did do it. Run it again. Oops. Run again. Okay, 1710.18. Open it. Yeah, okay. It is actually. Okay, so what you can see, oh, I'm cutting in and out. Sorry about that. Can you hear me now? Okay. That's what you get for being out in the country in a windstorm. Okay, so you can see what we've done here is now we're just trying to start to make it a little smarter about, when should it die? What should it say? What should the user see? And how is it going to notify you, right? So this is should it die? Those are our three things, right? Should it die? Question mark. What does user see? And how are you notified? Now, let's keep going though. Okay, questions on that so far? So what I'm showing you is I'm showing you two different things. Okay, so this is like our big, this is what's handling like things we don't expect. But down here in the code, stuff like this is handling things that we should reasonably be able to anticipate. Two different things, right? We should be able to figure out that, hey, it's possible that this thing is going to get run with nothing in ID or nothing in contact ID. We should be able to anticipate that someone's going to, where we need a number, someone's going to put letters, where that someone's going to mistype their email address or, whatever. Those are the places where you do these ifs and you catch them and you try to deal with them gracefully. But, for all of this, as hard as you try to catch all the things that you can reasonably foresee, there are going to be things you reasonably can't foresee. Like, the server is down, or the database is down. Server's up, but the database is down, so it returns an error or something like that. That's what these big error handlers are for. And then the little ones in here are for catching specific scenarios. Does that kind of make sense? Boy, that's a great question. Peter asks, are there depositories for this type of script? And not that I know of, because they're so unique to what you are writing. I mean, there are code samples for this exactly the same as there are code samples for everything. But nothing that you can just say, oh, here's a library that you can just plug in. No, nothing like that I know of. The closest thing to a depository of code that I know of is actually Stack Overflow, because like anything you want to do, someone's already asked how to do it pretty much. But again, none of it is plug and play. You've got to modify it to make it fit your particulars. Yeah, I know. Wouldn't that be nice? Okay, so let's keep going. Now let's take one more step, and then we're going to call it, we're about out of time, so we're going to call it a day. We'll take some final questions and talk about a code challenge. So the last thing I want to show you guys is, again, here in the big error handler, okay, the things that you cannot anticipate. Although you could put it elsewhere, by the way, but this seems like the most logical place to put it is, okay, well, again, you're not going to be watching these things. It's not like you're going to go look at your error logs every day, So if something really big happens, you probably want an email. So let me show you how to do an email. An email is built into this error log idea. And so it would look like this. Do we want to do this no matter what? Yeah, so let's do it like this. So if it's a big error, we're only going to do it on a big error. No, we're not, because then you won't see it. We'll just do it down here. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do like this. We're going to say email. So this is what's going in the email. Okay, so bear with me while we build this little email thing. Oh, you know what? I'm just going to cut and paste because this is going to take way too long. This is going to take way too long. I'll just explain it to you. Okay, so our email to ourselves is going to be the okay, that's okay. It's going to be this. So because it's an email, it's text. This is a big old string, right? And double quotes so that we can put our variables inside of it and it'll interpret it. So, and it's a HTML email as well. Okay, so I've got P's and strongs and things in here. So we're going to say, okay, new paragraph, an error, and then we're going to put the number. We know the error number occurred on line whatever. And in the file, here's where we use that file, period, strong, and then whatever the message is, right? New paragraph, end strong, new paragraph, here's the message, okay? But then we're going to do something else. So that's good, okay? That's kind of like being sent the error log, basically. But we're going to just go one step further. We're going to append. Remember, you guys, from when we did strings, what does period equals do? Well, it appends to whatever was already in this variable, right? You guys remember that? So in addition to this, now we also want to add, and I'm just doing this to keep these so that we could keep them straight and get rid of one if we wanted to. I could have made it all one thing, but we're gonna put a print R here. Okay, so here's our print R, and we're going to say print R, and we're going to do variables. Okay, vars. What this is going to do is this is going to do all of our variables that are in this file so that you can see them. Okay, so that hopefully you can kind of see what went wrong. It'll help you in debugging. Then the other thing that we have to do is anytime you're sending a HTML email over PHP, you've got to include this. This is your content type, goes in the header. And so then you take those things and you do this. You say error log, which by the way is the exact same function as the one that writes to the log file in the directory. But this time what we're going to do is we're going to say the syntax is message, which is email, comma, 1. So up here, we just stuck the default, we just put in the message, and it knew that the default, if nothing else is specified, no parameter is specified, it's going to write it to a file. I should show you that because this is not going to make too much sense if I do it this way. Say error log. Here. See, error log types. Okay, so there's different kinds of message types that you can put. One, these are the parameters. Let's see if I can find you a better example. Not really. So these are the parameters. One is a message. Next is the message type, which is an integer, and then a string, which is a destination, and some extra headers. All right, so here it tells you what those are. So message, fine. Message type says where the error should go. The possible message types are 0. It's just sent to the system logger. That's what we did before. That's the default option. Okay. 1, message is sent by email to the email address in the destination parameter. Okay, which is coming up. And then this is the only message type where the 4th parameter, extra headers, is used. 2 is no longer an option. 3 is appended to the file destination instead of overwriting that file. And then 4 is, I don't even know what that does. No clue. Okay, so the destination is, and the header is, this is our email address, and this is the header. So, whoops, let's do that. Let's finish this this out. So we said this is the message type. Okay, that's 1. That means email. So now we're going to say I want it sent to my email address. And finally, we've got to include that header because if you don't, with this now, if I recall, you can get away with sending plain text without this, I think, and it won't error. But if you are if you've got any HTML tagging or anything in there to make it formatted, then and you don't include this, it doesn't work. I don't even think it sends actually. So and then that's it. Okay, so now what should happen is when we create this error, which we're going to get by definition, well, we could even just do it here. Okay, then our error handler is going to run, and if it's greater than 2048, it's going to kill it. Oh, I better not do that because that might not. I better just let it do this because I know that's less than 2048. Anyway, that probably doesn't make too much sense. But anyway, else it's going to write a message to the error log and send us an email. Okay, it probably should be the other way around. Like if it's fatal, then we get the email, and if it's less, we don't. But yeah, because I wanted to show it to you, I just did it the other way around. Okay, so hopefully that's not confusing. So let's save this thing, and let's create the error. So this time it's going to give us 17, really? Did I turn something off here? Did that run? Try again. 1722, yep, 1723, 15. Okay, here we go. So I probably just sent myself 2 emails then. All right, so let's close this and let's look again. Here's our error log. 1723, 15, 16, fine. Okay, so that part worked. Now let's go over to my email and, oh man, just the time we've been here, I've gotten a ridiculous, see this? PHP error log message. And in my email is exactly what I was expecting. So it says, make this bigger. Okay. An error 8 occurred on line 72 in bold and in the file, the name of the file, right, in bold, because that's what we said in the HTML. And then we printed the variables, which is this. So it's giving us like everything on the page, which is kind of interesting in and of itself, right? Here's globals, which there aren't any. Here is our server variables. Here are our HTTP envelope variables, which we don't really care about so much. Here are our post array, which there's nothing in. Here's our HTTP post variables, which there's nothing, and get, and because nothing, we didn't actually send any. Here's the cookie, and the cookie variables, and so forth. So anyway, it dumps all this stuff out for you, so that in case you might find all that useful and trying to figure out what went wrong. Okay. And that's what we got when we dumped variables. This is all the stuff that it saved. So if you get this, chances are you're going to know something's wrong, on your site or with one of your processes, and that you better go check it and fix it, particularly if it hasn't been doing this before. So between that and some if statements, which I think you can probably figure out the ifs yourself. It's lots of if, is set, is not set type stuff, that goes around all of these statements. Between that and then this big one, if you get your syntax right, then, in theory, you should do a fairly decent job of trapping and handling those errors. If no one else is ever going to see this and it doesn't matter whether it runs or not, then you don't have to worry about that. But if you'd like to know that it doesn't, then kind of at a minimum, you got to put some of this stuff in. Okay. Have I totally, we were rocking along and now, made it not fun? Are you guys okay? Okay. All right. Looks like we have some questions. And I know that Simon had one. Yeah, exactly. That's the key is you've got to, these are muscles. It's like learning a language. If you can learn a language and then if you don't use it, it goes away. So, which is part of what we're going to talk about next. Simon, you had a question about the function earlier that I accidentally erased. So if you would put that back in, I will answer it. Richard, the line that actually sends the email is this error log, this line right here. This function, the difference between this line is that this is message type 0 because I didn't specify it. The default is 0, so that means write it to a file. But if I say 1 and then give it all this other information, it'll send the email. It's this line right here is what sent the email. And you can, in your handout, I did put the reference, I believe, to error log in on the PHP. I didn't, but I will. Here, I'll add it right now, so that you can read up on that if you want. Okay. Okay, let's see. And functions. Oh, right. How do you call a function that's in a different file? The way you do that is, let me go back to, well, here, let's do it here. What we would do is, this is our entire function right here. So we're going to create a new file called my functions.php, all lowercase, and then we're going to open the PHP and put our function in there. Now you could, in theory, have more, 50 functions in here. It wouldn't matter. And I believe now I have to make this public. I believe I don't do this very often. So this is another one of those things. If it doesn't work, I'd have to go confirm. But I think that has to be public now. And although I really thought, let's try it without, because I really thought all functions were global. So we'll see. We'll try it this way, and then if it doesn't work, we'll do it another way. So then back here, where I took that out, what we have to do is we have to say require, which is another function. It's a built-in function, and we say my functions.php close. And if all goes according to plan, what we should get is, let's do this just to confirm that it ran. Let's die else. Let's do this. I was called from a different file. See what happens. Okay, so now if we run this, yay! Oh, well, my formatting is messed, but anyway, no, Simon, you don't have to close the PHP. None of these files have closed PHP. The only time you have to close the in fact, I covered this on day 1. If you go back and look at the notes about when you have to close it, and when you don't. But anyway, that's how you do it. Require. The difference between require and require once is require once takes care of conflicts when potentially someone might already have it open elsewhere in your programs, but for us, generally require is sufficient, and then that's it. So you could have that's kind of back to the point. You can have your own file of functions that you like, that you use all the time in Infusionsoft, for example. And then every time that you want to sit down and write a script, you just have to, in the same way, which is exactly what the SDK is, by the way, right here. It's just a bunch of functions. It's a big, long file, right? That has all the things that you can do with Infusionsoft, and it calls it, and then you're just referring to it every time you make an API call. So in the same way that you do this, you could write your own little custom functions file, sit down. In fact, I got to do that now that I've said it. And then why am I keep writing this stuff? And then just do require and put it in, required in your script, and off you go. As long as it's in the same folder, or you can refer to it by path, you're good to go. You bet. Other questions before we end? We're about 5 minutes over. But that was really useful, I thought. Um, okay. So last thing I would say, last thing is two things. I asked you guys this last time, and some of you have actually, David and Richard, been kind enough to do it, which is if you wouldn't mind, if this course has been helpful to you and you think I can teach it, if you do me a great big favor and write as much on the review in the marketplace, the Infusionsoft marketplace, I'd really, really appreciate it. This is the link to my listing in the marketplace. That would help me out a lot. And just so you know, what I'm actually asking you is not only to put it there, but with permission to use it on the Train and Simple website at some point. So if you would not mind doing that, I'd really, really appreciate it. Now, here's my last thing. This is Peter's thing, actually. So Peter wrote me an email on Saturday. I thought he was exactly on point when he basically said that, it's one thing to sit and listen and go, the heart, and understand it, which is, there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. Like just being able to understand it when I do it is a big part of the battle. The next step is for you to be able to start taking code and, cutting and pasting and getting something simple working on your own, and there's got to be some sort of motivation for you to do that. Otherwise, all you will ever do is sit back and watch other people do it and go so what we really want to do is um, get you writing some code. Because that's how you're going to learn it. So one idea that I had was sort of this little code challenge. And quite honestly, I ran out of time before class because I was trying to get all these stupid error handling things done. And but what I'm thinking is I would like to come up with, and if anyone has any ideas right now, that would be awesome. But I would like to come up with a little assignment, very super simple, that you guys can all take on and do, and we'll put a deadline on it, and like by Friday, and everybody has to who wants to participate can post their code in the API learners group and share what would be ideal is if you actually commented it heavily and kind of just said what you did and what you know um, I don't know, but at least so that each of you could compare and see what you did differently. um so Barb, could you make it Monday? I need the weekend. Sure, absolutely. Barb wants to do it over the weekend. So the question is, what could yeah, okay, all right. I'm just trying to get you guys like, to off the schneid here. If you don't start, then you'll lose your momentum, right? Because by the way, Thursday, this is done. We're done with PHP. We're going back to extending Infusionsoft webinars. I'm going to do one on Thursday, which is the Gravity Forms one, because that's so cool that I just have to do it. But then I'm not doing another webinar for a couple of weeks because I am webinared out. I've got to actually do some work. And so I don't want you guys to lose momentum. So we'll make it link to the user group. Simon, aren't you in it? I thought the Facebook group. Hang on. So you want to have that link in front of them? I don't. So paste it in here, and I'll repaste it for Simon. Yeah, it's a Facebook. It's called the API Learners Lab, API Learners Group, and I kind of thought you were in it. Anyway, so any ideas on how we can on what we might do for a code challenge? Because I don't have one at the moment. I really don't. I mean, how simple do you think it needs to be, or how complex, or how other than I just know you guys need to now write some code. I knew as soon as Peter said it, I knew that was right. Now you need to go do it. So, Richard says, how about one of our API recipes? That's a great idea. We could do that. Pick a recipe And now, and that, because there's only been one that's done, so we could just pick one that's not done and have you guys all go do it. Let's really quick like bunnies. Let's just pick one, because there's no time like the present. API. Yeah. Oh. I think he must have locked me out. Well, this is going to be interesting. Okay, I cannot get into my own site. There we go. That was going to be a trick. Oops, hang on. Okay. So see, Peter says something that will be useful for our clients that we can use over and over. Oh, you're not asking for much. All right, let's see. Oh, recipes, something you can use over and over. Something you can put in a string. I mean, in a function rather. We'll look at beginner first. Let's do filter by beginner. How about well, are these too easy, you guys? Richard wants the counter one. Thoughts? Counter one? How to implement a counter and increment when an action occurs? Okay. All right. So this is what we're going to go with. Okay. So here's the assignment. I will write it out for you. But the assignment is here. Okay. So add a custom field for a counter. Every time a form gets filled out, increment the counter by 1. How's that? There you go. And I will actually put this, that's a good one. I will put this in your handout too. So you have it. It's going to go right here. All right. Format. Okay. And we're going to do that by when? Monday? Post in Facebook group by Monday. And so I'm being your accountability buddy. And hopefully by trying to work on this right away, some of this will get stuck in your brains. All right, that's it. We're done. You guys are trooper. There are about 12 people out of this whole thing who have been here pretty much for every single one of these sessions, which is pretty darn impressive. You guys know who you are. Some of you have jumped in when you can, and a bunch of you have also, I know, been watching the videos. But for those of you who are here day in and day out, well done. I mean, you obviously want to learn this, and so I want to encourage and support you in any way that I can to keep going with this. So if I can help, just because the class is over, don't hesitate to ask. But also ask each other, because that will use your help get things. I got to tell you, again, I say this after every class. I learned so much by teaching this class. He who teaches learns twice. It's been the best thing I have done. So if you guys will ask when you see a question in the group, if you will try to answer it. Even if you don't have an answer, even to just try to put something out there will help you guys learn, I promise you. Look it up or do what you have to do to try to answer each other's questions, and I promise you'll learn it faster. You guys have been great, and I've loved getting to know you, and we will see each other again on Thursday for the how to integrate Gravity Forms with Infusionsoft without a plugin. See you guys then.